You!
Me?
Yes, you! You wouldn't have the gumption to go to war. Look at you, eating cake and drinking milkshake. You wouldn't lay down your life at a moment's notice for your country, would you? It disgusts me, the youth of today. Pathetic. You wouldn't go to war tomorrow, would you?
Well, of course I wouldn't. You've been telling me my whole life the Second World War was terrible, and never to do that again.
Well, that's right, yes. It was awful, yes. And we should never, ever do it again, yes.
Yes.
Right, off I go, dearie. Bye-bye.
Okay. Have a good day, Mrs. Williams. I was born in 1984, 49 years after the end of the Second World War, and yet that conversation, which really did happen in a tea shop in Prestatyn when I was a teenager, and many other conversations like it that I've been subjected to throughout my life, is an unspoken yardstick by which many young men in Britain to this day are still measured. The achievements of the Second World War. Now, in America, this is given a name, the Greatest Generation, and rightly it is honoured as an achievement, fighting fascism, pushing back a dark chapter in the history of the world, is something to be remembered and honoured and respected. But in Britain, we've never really capped off, as it were, that effect. It's still with us to this day, and I would argue as a historian and as an archaeologist that we need to consider moving on. Let me be clear from the outset. I am not suggesting that we forget the Second World War, or that we stop honouring and remembering the sacrifice, the heroism and the achievement of the people who laid down their lives during the Second World War and other wars. I am an advocate of Remembrance Day, November the 11th, that grew out of armistice following the Great War, the war supposedly to end all wars. I am not suggesting that. But we do need to reconsider our relationship with the Second World War.
Listen, don't mention the war. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it all right.
Remember, above all else, don't mention the war. However, whenever feasible, refer to the Second World War on a near daily basis, especially in the political arena. Contrast and compare current events to the Second World War, always in the context of remembering that we won the war. Never mind which war, you know which one I'm talking about. The war. We won it. We won the war. But don't mention the war, of course. Yes, that would be unsightly. It is a particular and peculiarly British obsession, the Second World War.
Britain is going to make the Great Escape. We're going to get out of this union. We'll join in.
My father was at D-Day. He was never bullied by any German. And I'm his son. I'm not going to be bullied by any German either.
People fought and died, as my own father died in the last war, fighting for the right of the British people to resist tyranny.
The latest exchange of letters between the EU and the Prime Minister and the advice from the Attorney General, I sort of compare it with the vision of Neville Chamberlain coming back from meeting Hitler saying that peace in our time.
Not since Chamberlain went to Munich to meet Hitler and came back waving a piece of paper saying peace in our time has a British Prime Minister had so inept or ignoble a conclusion to negotiations.
I'm sure the irony has not been missed on the Prime Minister that it's exactly 80 years ago that another Conservative Prime Minister came back from Europe waving a piece of paper and claiming success. I believe the exact words were peace in our time, and it was Neville Chamberlain.
And we do not stop talking about it. We don't stop thinking about it. We are obsessed with the Second World War. You can scarcely go charitably 5 days with British radio and television without hearing a reference to the Second World War. Just the other day I turned on BBC4 to see what documentaries were on, and it was back to back World War II. There was no particular anniversary, no particular event. It wasn't D-Day or something like that. It was simply a case of, we're Britain and this is what we do. We don't shut up about the war. And to a certain extent it is understandable. The Second World War traumatized this nation, especially London, and within Britain London is more often than not the cultural focus, for better or worse. And that was a real focus of the vulnerability of civilians to total war, to bombing. The Blitz and the resultant Blitz spirit is, to a certain extent rightly, held up as a cultural touchstone to British resilience. But people also forget the darker things that happened during the Blitz between Brits. This wasn't done to us, but we looted each other. Really dark things happened between strangers in public air raid shelters. People were neglected, rationing. All sorts of horrible things occurred. But it's ignored in the face of the Blitz spirit, the popular cultural response to the Second World War. And that continues to define how we think about ourselves to this day, especially in the context of Brexit. This morning, in fact, I woke up to a comparison between the EU and Britain as an act of escaping, the Great Escape, in fact. For modern Britain, the Second World War is our founding mythos. Amongst the classical Greeks, there was a concept that before them, at some time, there was a greater golden age, when Homer and the Iliad and the Trojan War and gods and men and demigods and art and music and pottery, everything was just greater back then. And now all we can hope to achieve is something that pales woefully in comparison, but we'll do our best. Ancient Greece had a founding mythos. Everyone does. And at the moment in Britain, arguably, our mythos is based around the Second World War. And we need, I would argue, as a historian and archaeologist, a new founding mythos. We're at risk of becoming that aged athlete who once won a gold medal and won't shut up about, oh.
And here comes Hurst. He's got some people are on the pitch. They think it's all over. It is now. It's four. And Charlton.
Now, obviously, as a Welshman, the English Football World Cup doesn't really mean that much to me, but yeah, it's a trend here in the United Kingdom. And this, right now, this is an opportunity at this time, following the 20th century, to think about who we are now and where we're going next. And I have 3 key reasons why it's a good idea to reshape our founding mythos and reconnect with understanding with our history. Reason number 1 is quite simple. The Second World War as a model for Britain in the modern world doesn't work. Not least because it's by definition an adversarial relationship, Britain against the world. And indeed this gets twisted, and you see memes floating around on Facebook, for example, where it talks about how we stood alone in the Second World War and we can do it again, by Jove. Rationing and bombs didn't keep the Brits down. Let Johnny Foreigner do their worst. Not only does it set up an adversarial relationship with the rest of the world, Britain versus the world, but it's also historical bollocks. It's based on a fantasy that Britain stood alone. We did not stand alone during the Second World War. We had allies and also the remnants of an empire. You know, we were not alone in the Second World War, and to say otherwise is nonsense. But it does appeal in the most dangerous of ways, in a seductive way, to that instinct in the British psyche that's been cultivated since the Second World War, that somehow we survived, and we must never forget. And it's poisonous, and I think we need to move on. We need to put it in its place and move forward. The second reason I think we need a new founding myth in this country is because our obsession with the Second World War is only partly an obsession with the Second World War. It's actually an obsession with empire in disguise, or rather the loss of empire. The Second World War was the last time that Britain really had global imperial influence. And ever since the Second World War, that same instinct that was traumatized by the Blitz has also been punched in the gut by the gradual erosion and loss of land and power and political influence on the global stage. Not only have we lost empire, but also, because of that, we've never really had to face up to what it means to have had an empire in the modern world. We conveniently forget our role in massacres and injustices around the world, in India, in America, in the Caribbean, in the Polynesian islands, so on and so forth, in Australia. It just goes on and on and on. We never really confront that about ourselves. And I think a new mythos, a new relationship with our history is required, partly to confront that, to think about it, and also stop trying to have our cake and eat it in terms of empire. Yes, we brought lots of wonderful things to India. People often talk about, for example, the railway network. But we also took a lot from India, natural resources not least, and we spent the better part of 500 years telling the world Britain is amazing. So we can't, in that sense, have our cake and eat it when we are then surprised that people want to come to Britain and live here. We can't be shy of immigration, or of people having a love of Britain, in fact, being Anglophiles, as some people would say, because we've been encouraging it for the past 500 years-ish through empire. We need to understand that. We need to think about it, and we need to come out of that with a healthy post-imperial identity. The third reason I would suggest we need a new founding mythos for the United Kingdom is to have a future, and to have a future that's exciting and bold and relevant. The problem with cultural conservatism, I'm not talking about political conservatism, but being culturally conservative, basing the present and the idea of the future on essentially what has just happened, is that there's not very much room for change. There's not very much room for innovation, for vibrancy, for cultural currency, and for that currency to have lifeblood coming in from other parts of the world, but also other parts of society. Frankly, if some element of cultural change hadn't happened in the past 75 years, I would not have gone to university. I could not have gone. I'm very much from a working class background, and the first person in my family to go to university, and I probably would have been working in a mine or in a shop looking at my immediate family history. Cultural conservatism is stagnant. There's nothing exciting or challenging in that future, in that projected destiny for a nation. I want to be challenged by the future. I want to have conversations and to lead the way in new bold ideas when it comes to environment, energy, philosophy, art, music, all manner of things, which Britain was doing seemingly quite well. In the past 30 years we've made great strides, but we seem to be falling back on a comfortable myth that is not serving our immediate future. We need a new founding mythos. And incidentally, had we lost the Second World War, we wouldn't all be speaking German in Britain today. That simply would not have happened. And yet it's a ongoing poisonous myth that we still tell one another. In fact, just the other day, there was a historian leading a BBC presenter around Bletchley Park, where they made the great strides of breaking the Enigma code, and he said, well, you know, of course, if we hadn't achieved great things here, then you and I would be speaking German, and I would be holding a bratwurst in my hand, or a pipe. Who knows? Some sort of German pipe, no doubt. Yes, German. It's nonsense. History shows us that invading forces almost never manage to replace the mother tongue. Frankly, Britain is actually a really good example of this. You know, the Normans didn't replace English when they came here. They modified it. They modified certainly the upper echelons of life, but they didn't eradicate the language, and that wouldn't have happened here. So I'm also tired of that, again, as a historian, as an archaeologist and anthropologist. It's nonsense. We need to let go of it. So there you have it. A bit of a rant, admittedly, but this has been 34 years in the making. But hopefully it was, at the very least, vaguely entertaining in places. I am truly fed up of waking up to this World War II ripple echo effect on British culture. And this morning, the first thing I saw on the news was a reference to the European Union as a prison camp that Britain is making the great escape from. It's an irrelevant and ridiculous comparison. After all, the EU is not a prison camp. It's much more like a luxury hotel that we then decide to start tunnelling out through the basement. But anyway, I'll put that to one side. Whatever happens next, leaving Europe, not leaving Europe, it looks like we will be leaving Europe. We, Britain, myself as a Welshman, as part of Britain, need to rethink our place in the world. We need to understand actual history. We need to understand how we affected the world on a global, in terms of global history, and we did. We need to be proud of that. We also need to take responsibility for that, and we need to forge something new. We could actually really do something quite exciting in terms of being a post global power. What happens next? You know, I know there are some instincts in the US at the moment to be deeply concerned about no longer being, you know, the superpower of the planet. You know, if and when China overtakes them economically, well, Britain could lay the model for what happens next. What happens when your empire diminishes? What happens when you are the elder statesman of the world? But at the moment, we are that footballer who won't quite let go of the fact that, yes, we won the World Cup back in 1966, but that was a long time ago. The same goes for the Second World War, and the same goes for so many other aspects of British greatness. We need something else, something new to hold on to. And I'm not alone as a historian or an archaeologist in thinking this. There are also lots of great news articles recently been written along these lines, and I'll link to those below. But hopefully we can start a conversation, a fruitful conversation, about what history has to be for us now. Because history is, in that sense, it always has been the founding myth. You know, that's the function of history. Herodotus put Greece in the context of the world through gathering stories about the world around Greece. History always serves a certain current cultural narrative, answering the question, how and why are we here today? And I would say that at the moment our history isn't serving us very well. It's making us weaker, less confident, more irrelevant, and much less kind than we should be. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Please do comment below. Please do keep the comments civil. I've no doubt that there'll be some very passionate remarks, you know, against this video, but I think it's important that a conversation is started. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.